Considered to be the wickedest man that ever lived, the Beast 666, Aleister Crowley. Before he would come to be known as the Beast 666, Aleister Crowley, born Edward Alexander Crowley, was born into a fundamentalist Christian family. He grew up studying the Bible and was actually a very sickly child. His father, Edward Crowley, was a traveling evangelist and would pass away from tongue cancer when Aleister was just 11 years old. This was a huge turning point in Aleister's life, and it was at this point when Aleister would turn away from the church, start to resent his family, and went on the quest for the ultimate sin. He began to hate his mother very much and could hardly stand to be in her presence. She's the one that nicknamed him the Beast, saying that he acted just like the Beast from the book of Revelations. Aleister would carry on this way through his teenage years, all the way into being introduced to the occult and magic in his college days. In college, he would focus on rock climbing and would be initiated into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, with members such as W.B. Yeats, Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, under the leadership of MacGregor Mathers, the man responsible for translating the Goetia, or the Lesser Keys of Solomon. At the age of 21, Aleister would finally receive his father's inheritance, which was earned from his family's brewing company. Around the same time of his life, while in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Aleister would become hopelessly addicted to sex and drugs. He would also meet well-known occultist and magician Alan Bennett, who was also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, who would move in with Aleister. Alan would introduce Crowley to the ritual use of drugs and magic. In the apartment they shared, Aleister would turn two of his rooms to two different temples to magic. One, a white magic room covered in mirrors, and one, a black magic room, with an altar held up by a black male figure, and a skeleton in which Aleister would feed blood often. The two would live in the apartment and continue to do magic together until Aleister got word that his apartment was being watched. At that time in Britain, homosexuality was illegal, and rumors surrounding Aleister's sexual exploits with males finally reached the authorities. Alan would move to South Asia to study Buddhism, while Aleister would purchase a mansion in Loch Ness to take on the infamous Agrimelin rituals. To perform these rituals, one needed a secluded place, and they needed to abstain from sex, drugs, living only on bread and water. The ritual consisted of contacting one's guardian angel in order to gain control of the 12 rulers of hell and the forces of darkness. While undertaking the ritual, many weird things would happen to the people around Aleister, such as sober people becoming alcoholics again and attempting to kill their families, people running back home, trying to get as far away as they could from Aleister, and even cases of suicide. The house would later be bought by lead singer Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, and he even claimed that it was haunted. Aleister broke off from the ritual early so he can go to Paris to be initiated by Mathers into the inner circle of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This, many believe, is what caused the sightings of the Loch Ness Monster and caused Aleister to be possessed by demons for the rest of his life. In 1900, after receiving his initiation into the inner circle of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Aleister would travel to Mexico City. While in Mexico, he would practice John Dee's Enochian invocations, also known as the angelic language. And according to him, he would be initiated into Freemasonry and start his own magical society, the Lamp of the Invisible Light. Once finished in Mexico, he would travel back to Paris and become friends with British painter Gerald Kelly. Aleister would become a painter himself and would become pretty popular in the Paris art scene. Around this same time, Aleister would meet Gerald Kelly's sister, Rose Kelly, and after 24 hours of meeting each other, the two would get married to get Rose out of an arranged marriage. The two would immediately go on an extended honeymoon, traveling the world together, making a stop in Cairo, Egypt, where they would stay the night in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, and Aleister would start reading from the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as the Goetia. Later, Rose would start getting messages from the other side, or who she believed to be Horus. Aleister, knowing that she was very ignorant of Egyptology, took her to a museum to have her point out the deity who she claimed to be speaking to. And to his surprise, she brought him to display 666 with a stele depicting Ra, very similar to the modern interpretation of Horus. Soon after, Aleister would make contact with a being he dubbed Ayahuas. This being would tell him that mankind was on the verge of a new equinox, a new aeon, and over the next 3 days would dictate to him the Book of the Law, which would become the foundation from his group Thelema, and give us the infamous quote, "Do what thou wilt." After leaving Egypt, Aleister's wife Rose would give birth to a baby girl named Lilith for short. Around this same time, Aleister was set off to lead an expedition of Kanchenjunga, the third highest peak in the world, located in the Himalayas. There would be a mutiny along the climb, and 4 climbers would eventually lose their lives while rebelling against Aleister's leadership and the way that he treated his servants on the expedition. After the failed expedition, Aleister would retreat to his family and would take them on the trip across China. He would eventually abandon his family on the trip across China to go meet up with one of his mistresses in Shanghai. The two would perform magic together, but on his arrival back in Britain, he would find out that his daughter had died from typhoid. He would blame his wife Rose's alcoholism for the incident and would begin to abuse her terribly, eventually having her locked up in a mental institution in 1911. But before Rose would be sent to the mental hospital, they would have another daughter, Lola Zaza, who would be raised by the Kelly family. The same year his daughter was born in 1907, he would make a dedicated disciple, Victor Neuberg. The two would become lovers and immediately start performing magic together. He would also take on mistress, famous violinist, Leela Wadall. The 3 of them, along with Aleister's other followers, would perform theater magic. They would perform the rites of Eleusis and attempt to attract Archimedes for paying audiences. Aleister would eventually take Victor to Algeria so the two could perform Enochian magic in the Sahara Desert. This is where Aleister would get his influence on sex magic. And the incident in the Sahara, while the 2 men were attempting to contact a high-ranking demon called the Dweller Khoranzan, Aleister would step outside the circle, and Victor would eventually be scarred for life by the ordeal. After returning from Algeria in 1912, Aleister Crowley would write one of his most popular books, The Book of Lies. Once The Book of Lies was out, Aleister would be accused of sharing some of the OTO's most intimate secrets. He was accused this by the leader of the OTO, Theodore Roos. After the two conversed and Aleister convinced him that it was only a coincidence, Theodore initiated Aleister into the highest degree of the OTO. Aleister would be initiated under the magical name Baphomet and would become the Grand Sovereign General of the OTO sects in Britain, Ionia, and Ireland, eventually becoming the head of the OTO worldwide. He would immediately start by reworking all the rites and rituals of the OTO, blending his own sex magic practices with the rites and rituals of Freemasonry. In 1913, Aleister would travel to Moscow, managing a dancing group called the Ragtime Girls. While in Moscow, he would write the Gnostic Mass, which is a sexual ritual that is still practiced by the OTO today. He would also publish another one of his famous works, A Hymn to Pan. Now, after having nearly full control of the OTO, Aleister would return to Paris, where him and Victor Neuberg would work for 7 weeks straight on 24 new rituals. During that time, Aleister's rituals would become more sadistic, and Neuberg would finally distance himself from Aleister, building up the courage to leave Aleister even though he put a curse on him. During the start of World War I, Aleister would inquire the British government to allow him to work as a spy. He would be denied, and so he would move to America. Aleister would find a job writing for Vanity Fair. He would also find a job writing for a German publication called The Fatherland, writing German propaganda under the name Baphomet. This would eventually earn him the title of traitor by the British government. After leaving America, Aleister would move with his new Scarlet Woman, Leah Hersing, to Cefalù, Italy. There, they would start their temple dedicated to Thelema, called the Abbey of Thelema. They would also bring along a nanny named Nanette. Every morning they would start their day in their magical robes, giving prayers to the sun in the east, consecrating their magical weapons, and in the evenings they would finish up the day with sex magic. Both Leah and Nanette would become pregnant with Aleister's children. Leah would lose one of their children to a sickness, and she would miscarry another. Nanette, being extremely jealous of Leah, and would have her and Aleister's son away from the Abbey. The Abbey would take on many followers over the years, including silent femme actress Jane Wolfe. In the Abbey, members of Thelema will be subject to filth and disease, filled with drug-crazed orgies and sex magic, where the children were also allowed to watch. Aleister couldn't kick his heroin addiction and ended up writing the book Diary of a Drug Fiend to fund the Abbey of Thelema. There was also a ritual there where they would give members high doses of drugs and lock them in a room with paintings all over the walls. Members were also encouraged to cut themselves every time they used the word I. There was even a man that lost his life there named Raoul Loveday. It was suspected that he drank from a dirty well. There was also a story of him drinking cat's blood in a magic ritual, and this made him even more sick. There was also many stories of bestiality and human sacrifice that went on in the Abbey. Once Loveday died and his wife, Betty May, made it back to England, she began immediately to tell newspapers what was going on in Sheffield. A publication called John Bull was the most critical of Aleister. It was around this time that Aleister would earn the name the wickedest man in the world, and multiple articles would be published about him up until the moment that Benito Mussolini would deport him from Italy. After being kicked out of Italy, Aleister would go through phases of multiple lovers and continued sex magic, off and on drug addictions, and everywhere he went, his reputation would precede him. During this time, he would write another one of his famous works, Magic in Theory and Practice. He would even have one more child that he would raise like a loving father. Although surrounded by some friends and family that did not desert him, Aleister still remained hopelessly addicted to drugs until the day of his death. He would pass away at the age of 72, but before his death, he regretted his life and he questioned if he ever did anything good for humanity. And during his life, he left behind a wake of people who committed suicide, ended up going to insane asylums, lost in prostitution, became drug addicts, or just plainly lost their lives. Even with the truth of his toxic personality, he still became one of the greatest pop icons in the 60s and till this day. Some believe he is the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's. He heavily influenced the Rolling Stones, rock music and metal as a whole, and even many influential rappers of today. Many believe that it was his writings that influenced the 60s counterculture of free love, with the undertone of do what thou wilt, and the practice of Thelema still exists today, even though many of his writings included detailed ways to do sacrifice, including human and child. Was Aleister possessed by demons? Was he just a lost soul seeking to express himself? Or was he truly the B666 and the wickedest man who ever lived? You decide.